Hi, I'm Nadine Sultanian, and I'm going to be talking about reforming solitary confinement. Isolation has commonly been used as a form of punishment throughout society, such as with time out with kids, where they are placed alone as a consequence of trouble they cause. Yet Dr. Peter Heyman, a child rearing consultant, explains that this punishment is not only ineffective, but detrimental, since it does not work through issues and instead harms the mental state. The concept of placing a person alone and expecting them to come out of it improved is unjustified. Yet it is still expected to work, but now with adults in prison after misconduct. This is what solitary confinement, also known as restrictive housing and disciplinary segregation, refers to. Inmates are placed in small cells for up to 24 hours a day for 15 days or more, with limited access to human contact, personal belongings, and recreational activities. The practice is meant to deter inmates from future trouble and lower misbehavior. However, it instead harms their mental health, as explained by the British Psychological Society Journal, leading to anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder that wasn't prevalent before, and in many cases makes them more likely to reoffend. The conditions of solitary confinement have led to debate about discontinuing it, yet to no avail, since there have been several ineffective attempts, as explained by the American Civil Liberties Union. Therefore, since abolishing solitary confinement seems to be unrealistic, the next best goal is to reform it. Therefore, the question remains, how should solitary confinement in the U.S. be reformed so that it does not harm the inmates it intends to improve? In the TED Talk, How to Build a Resilient Future Using Ancient Wisdoms within the stimulus material, Julia Watson explains that resilience to adversity requires use of past actions for future solutions. Therefore, we must look at past reforms such as the Humane Alternatives to Long-Term Act, also known as HALT. HALT includes rehabilitation programs and more out-of-cell activity. And by making these more accessible and including with other inmates, the practice can be in turn beneficial. To walk you through my answer, I will first explain my connection to the stimulus material, then the counter-argument, then the alternative solutions that led me to my conclusion. By the year 2021, according to Yale Law, 50,000 inmates were in solitary confinement from a range of reasons, from simply talking back to violent actions. In confinement, the prisoner is being left without a support system, something vital to their rehabilitation and their sanity. In the chapter of Long Walk to Freedom within the stimulus material by Nelson Mandela, he highlights how support is needed for prisoners not to deteriorate and to maintain hope for change. For comparison, in the additional stimulus material, in other words, resilience among Haitian survivors of the 2010 earthquake, Haitians felt resilient against the conflict due to the support that they had. Solitary confinement takes away the power in inmates to work through their battles due to the lack of support from other inmates. On the contrary, solitary confinement can also be necessary. Prison Fellowship, an organization focused on reforming prison and justice systems, explains that while confinement is used for minor violations, it is also used for serious misconducts and can help protect multiple parties, such as in cases of sexual assault and physical violence. Additionally, officers such as Captain Stewart of the Jail Advisory Committee express how difficult it is to maintain order and safety within prisons. And having the ability to separate inmates makes it so that there is lower risks and lower threats within prisons. Conversely, an investigative reporter, Anajli Sue, reports that data from prisons reveal inmates in confinement are in fact more likely to reoffend than those in the general population, meaning there will be more violence, which goes against the goals that are trying to be achieved by confinement. This is most likely due to the structure, meaning there have been many attempts to reform the system, such as therapeutic diversion units, also known as TDUs. According to the Vera Institute of Justice, inmates with mental health issues are disproportionately sent to solitary confinement for reasons due to their illness. This has led to public outcry, leading for prisons to create TDUs where there is more out-of-cell activity, less restrictions, and an addition of therapeutic and recreational activities. According to American Justice of Preventative Medicine, inmates in TDUs have reduced rates of misconduct, violence, and behavioral infractions when compared to those in the general population of inmates. What is provided by TDUs is what is needed by all inmates. However, it is only eligible for those with severe mental illness issues, limiting its effectiveness as reform for the system as a whole. Beyond reform, there have also been acts of guidelines against restrictive housing. For example, a bill called Restricting the Use of Solitary Confinement was introduced by the U.S. House of Representatives, and it has not been approved yet. The act states that an inmate cannot be in confinement for more than 15 consecutive days, and placement cannot be done without reasonable cause and evidence that it is the best intervention, and it also limits it for vulnerable population, meaning those under the age of 21, older than 55, those who have mental, medical, or physical disabilities, and those who are pregnant. Guidelines restrict unfair placement of inmates since, according to Vera Institute, prisons do enforce solitary confinement even without reasoning. However, the guidelines only place restrictions on admission, and even if passed, thousands of inmates will continue to be placed in solitary confinement and be harmed by it due to the minimal reform. Therefore, we can conclude that there needs to be a combination of both guidelines and reforms, which has led me to my conclusion. The American Civil Liberties Union writes on a new act called HALT, which enforces no more than 15 consecutive days in confinement, banning it for vulnerable populations, and also includes 6 hours of out-of-cell programming and 1 hour of out-of-cell recreation, and also offers residential rehabilitation units for behavioral needs. In Watson's TED Talk on how to build a resilient future, powerful advances are done by looking at where past actions succeeded. The HALT takes both a combination of reform and guidelines, which wouldn't work as well on their own, making it the best route. However, there still remains limitations. Much like the TDUs, the residential rehabilitation units are only available for select inmates, and despite all inmates' need for the support programs. Additionally, HALT does not allow for much interaction with other inmates, even though it would be beneficial to them, as explained by Nelson Mandela. Therefore, when incorporating HALT in prisons, there needs to be increased accessibility for rehab and interaction with others, possibly during the 1 hour of out-of-cell recreation. Yet there still remains a possibility that the act won't be passed. This is potentially due to many prisons believing solitary confinement is the best way to limit harm. However, what they don't take into account is that the protective measures will still remain, and the rehab provided for inmates will make them less likely to reoffend, which is in favor of them. A larger setback is the money required for the additions of the reform. Yet according to Solitary Watch, an organization focused on reporting solitary confinement within the US, the current placing of inmates in restricted housing is 3 times the amount of placing them in the regular population. With the increased restrictions, fewer inmates will be placed in solitary confinement for a shorter amount of time, meaning fewer resources will be needed and the extra money can be spent on the reformations. Even though solitary confinement is meant to stop harm and limit trouble, reform through HALT is needed because solitary confinement currently inflicts the harm it is trying to prevent. If the practice is to remain in the US, there needs to be reform with programs like HALT, with more access to the rehabilitation programs and interaction with others to make it beneficial as opposed to harmful. Thank you. Here are my sources.
Again, what evidence did you gather that you didn't include, and why did you choose not to include it?
So I found that solitary confinement is unfairly placed on people of color, and which provides a racial bias towards it. And while that is a concept that needs to be reformed, I couldn't find any way to incorporate that reform since that is a systematic issue. So the evidence of it being a sort of punishment that has bias in systematic conflicts such as racism, I didn't include to choose it because with my concept being about reforming it, I didn't find any ways to reform it since that is something that cannot be changed just solely within this situation like solitary confinement.
And how did you use the conclusions or questions of others to advance your own research?
So my conclusion was mainly based on where other people found that the practice needed to be changed. And like the therapeutic diversion units, I found that their conclusion was that there needed to be support for people of that have mental illnesses. And by taking that, and also many other people saying that it needs to be abolished as a whole, I took a combination of those to create my solution, which combined both the support programs and also took a combination of lessening the restrictions that many people wanted to abolish as a whole, but I knew couldn't be achieved since many came to the conclusion, like the officers, saying that solitary confinement was needed.
Thank you.